Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be continuing our journey with Al Simmons as he makes his way through the different spheres of hell in Spawn number 51. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in either July or August of 1996. Honestly, I'm not certain which one because the front cover here says July, but the inside cover says August, so take your pick, I suppose. We see a hand being completely entwined by a large stitching-covered tendril on top of a absolute nothing white background. Now, those of you who have been watching my channel for any length of time are probably well aware that this is normally something that I have a real problem with. However, in this case, there's an actual canonical story reason for this to be the case on the front cover that we're going to find out more about once we get inside. Story: Todd McFarlane. Pencils: Craig Capullo. Inks: Todd McFarlane, Danny Meeke. Copy editor and letters: Tom Orzechowski. Color: Brian Haberlin, Dan Kemp. The story begins with Spawn falling through an empty nothingness, just falling for what seems like an eternity, with no real perspective as to where he is or there being anything around him at all. The fact of the matter is, there's no sky, there's no ground, there's no horizon, but still he has this sensation of tumbling and falling through the air, even though he's surrounded by bleakness and nothingness. We learn that this is in fact the fourth sphere of hell, which is kind of odd because where we left off in issue number 50, Spawn had left the second sphere, and assumedly he would have been going through all of the spheres, but that is not the case. He skipped entirely over the third and went straight to the fourth, which is where we're catching up with him now. As Spawn continues to tumble through a seemingly endless void, he is shocked when his body then suddenly impacts a non-existent ground and then is stretched tight to said ground by seemingly non-existent restraints. He can see nothing holding him down, but as he struggles to try and get back up, the non-existent restraints only grow tighter around his limbs. He shouts out, "What kind of madness is this?" but is suddenly caught off guard when he feels a familiar sensation, one that he hoped he would never feel again, as his costume without warning begins to peel itself away from his skin, causing him an amazing amount of agony. Now, there's a few interesting points of story that are brought up during these two pages. One being that it notes that he's felt this once before, when in fact we know he's been separated from his costume on two separate accounts. Once by his own hand during the Blood Feud miniseries, where he peeled the costume off of his body all by his lonesome, and once during the ongoing series by the Curse, which of course was not something he volunteered for. So I find it odd that the comic only references it being done one time, when in fact it's been two times. And also of note is that we learn a little bit more about the fourth sphere of hell, and that apparently all of humanity's greatest sins and atrocities are here laid out for the unfortunate few who find themselves here to be witnessed. Now, we don't see anything around Spawn, and this, of course, is again being portrayed as a limitless and endless void, but it does seem as though that there is something afoot here, as it's mentioned that it's not what is seen on the fourth sphere that makes it such a horrible place to be, but what is felt. We are then introduced to what is described as the latest unholy ruler of this territory, which most likely means this is in fact the archdemon who rules over the fourth sphere of hell, as it comes up behind Spawn. The demon then apologizes for being late, stating that it was finishing up some last-minute stitching, and then says, "Simmons, that's your name, right?" Trying to remain defiant, Spawn simply shouts out, "Screw you," as the demon says, "Ah, yes, your file stated that you were feisty." Then the demon hovers over Spawn, stating that he's rather impressed by the fact that Spawn is here to begin with, as it's not very often they get one of Mabulge's elite on this level, stating that it's been roughly 2 millennia since this has happened. The demon then decides to try and figure out where it should start, wondering if maybe childhood would be appropriate. Still confused by everything that's happening, Spawn asks, "What do you mean, my childhood?" And the demon simply recants by stating, "Yes, you're right. Your childhood actually wasn't that bad." Spawn continues to be totally confused by everything that's happening as he simply asks, "What do you want from me?" And the demon says, "The same thing that you want, answers." Spawn is still confused as he states, "Answers to what? Hell already has me." But the demon then states something quite interesting as it goes on to state that Spawn did not come here willingly, and that's the key. That in order for him to finally be at peace, he has to accept the evil that's inside of him and embrace it. And just admit to himself that that evil is part of who he is, just like all the evil around him. Spawn, looking at the endless void that seems to be in all directions, simply says, "What?" The demon goes on to explain that the sins of mankind are all around them and that he can see them, that they are quite beautiful in their endlessness. Spawn states that he is not interested in the hallucinations of a demon, but this is where the demon starts to actually show some very real emotion as it screams out, "How dare you?" He then goes on to explain to Spawn that the horridness of this level is created simply by nothing more than the sins of the human realm, and that every atrocity that exists on this level is because of all of the sins of mankind and their capacity for evil. But what's more important is where all of those sins are born. Now, there's quite a few interesting things that are going on here. Number one, we see the demon approach Spawn from behind as he's supposedly latched to a ground. Now, this means the sensation of this ground and the bindings that hold him only apply to Spawn, as the ground isn't there because that's where the demon appears from. Notably, we see the demon's tail trailing off behind it as it then hovers above him. We also learn that this entire domain is apparently the result of all of mankind's sins, and that it's constructed using those evil deeds and sinful behaviors, and that none of this actually originates from the afterlife itself, which is pretty impressive considering how different this seemingly is from all of the other different parts of hell that we've seen so far in the Spawn story. The demon then explains to Spawn that all of the sin and evil that make up the fourth sphere of hell originate in the human soul, and that while you can't see it, you can feel it, and that the fourth sphere is essentially just a holding tank for dark energy. He then continues to explain that he leaves all of the physical stuff to the other kingdoms of hell as he's more interested in focusing on the core of the problem, as it were. So he asks Spawn directly, "Why is it you're here?" Spawn predictably answers Wanda, however the demon doesn't necessarily accept this answer. He tells Spawn that he is in fact here because of love, but not for love of Wanda. It's because of his love of killing that has brought him to this place. Spawn tries to refute this answer, telling the demon that he's wrong. However, the demon tells Spawn that he's being delusional and that he needs to prove to him that this is the case. He says then that he's going to strip away a layer to show Spawn images from his past. He then pulls off a layer of, I guess, what Spawn has left of skin as Spawn screams out in pain. He then uses this skin to create images of Spawn's past as Al Simmons, showing him several of his victims that died by his own hand. He shows him the first man he killed, telling him, "You remembered that one, don't you? That one was really easy." But as things went on, you began to be less discerning in those who you killed, and very often innocent victims fell to your hand. You always absolved yourself of any wrongdoing, telling yourself that you were just following orders, and that this only became easier when you started to beginning to get accolades and awards for all of your bravery in battle, as it were. However, he then goes on to tell Spawn that the unfortunate part of all of this was his propensity for killing and violence gained him much notoriety in hell, specifically with Mabalja, who upon seeing his proficiency at killing and violence, decided that he wanted to make Al a general in his army. He then goes on to tell Spawn that his special kind of love is really quite rare in hell. Now, one thing I find quite interesting about this part is the idea that Al Simmons' love for killing was rare, and that's why he was made a general in Mabulja's army. We saw in Spawn number 8 that Billy Kincaid was also enlisted by the Mabulja, but not as a general. He was given a K3 Mirlu cert, symbiote, I should say, and was made more of just a rank and file member of Mabulja's army. Now, Billy Kincaid absolutely loved killing. You could make the argument that because his victims were children, he wasn't necessarily quite so skilled as Al Simmons was, who was a black ops soldier in the American military, but he definitely had that quote-unquote special kind of love, as it were. And while we're on the subject, one thing I did want to bring up was that in issue number 8, after the Vindicator grabs Billy Kincaid and starts making his way back to the 8th sphere up the tower in hell, he explains to Billy that if he had been chosen by the 4th sphere of hell, he would have become a fuel rod. Now, that's all the explanation we ever get about the 4th sphere of hell up until this issue. But I find it kind of odd that that would have been what was stated all the way back in issue number 8, but no such thing is even mentioned in this issue at all when it comes to what the 4th sphere is and what it's supposed to be doing. We are then teleported back to Earth, where several specialists are doing their best to try and figure out how on Earth Terry Fitzgerald was able to make such a miraculous recovery. They bombard him with question after question, trying to figure out exactly what happened and make sure that he's told them everything he knows. They note that the only side effect of this cure, as it was, is that the hair on the side of his head has suddenly grayed. As they begin to ask if they can run more tests, Terry finally gets fed up as he stands up and begins to storm out of the office, stating that he's had enough and that he won't return. The doctors all state that this is a normal response and he'll be back once he's recovered a little more, but Terry turns around and assures them once again that he'll not be back ever again. He then makes a point to ask, "I have one other question, doctors. Is it necessary that every single specialist has to be old, bald, and nearsighted?" He then slams the door behind him as his family physician gets a bit of a chuckle out of this, and all of the specialists look at each other shocked, and one of them even says, "I should start a study." Now, interestingly enough, none of them will ever be able to figure out exactly what happened to Terry through scientific means. Of course, this is because he was healed by Spawn's quote-unquote magic. And one of the things they found the most confusing was not just the sudden disappearance of all of his cancer, but that all of his injuries from the car accident also miraculously healed, which doesn't make sense to them at all. Again, it wouldn't, because this all happened via magic and not through any explainable means that you would ever be able to verify with scientific method. Later that day, we rejoin Terry at his home as he recants the uncomfortable events that happened at the doctor's office to his wife Wanda. However, Wanda expresses that she too is a bit uneasy with everything that happened involving the miraculous healing of her husband, and kind of wishes that he had basically humored the specialist a little bit more and agreed to the test, and that she wants to have a few more answers the same way that the doctors do. However, before the conversation can get any deeper than that, the two of them are interrupted when their daughter Cyan runs into the room like a hurricane. She is very excited to show her parents the necklace that she has made. Terry holds it up and tells her that it's very pretty, as he's rather impressed by his daughter's ability to make a necklace out of an old pacifier and a shoelace. He then tells Cyan, "Why don't we get rid of that filthy shoelace and replace it with some kite string or something?" However, Cyan suddenly becomes very defensive and screams no as she pulls the necklace away from her father. Realizing how upset she is, Terry agrees to let her keep it, but then asks her where she found that shoelace in the first place. Cyan responds, "At the hospital," meaning that this is in fact the exact same shoelace that once held together the face of Spawn. We then find ourselves across town in the offices of now private investigators Sam Burke and Twitch Williams. Sam and Twitch are diligently combing over all of the files left to them in a dossier by a mysterious informant, one who they have not yet seen or know anything about. The two of them are arguing about how they should proceed with the quote-unquote evidence that was left outside of their door. Sam is a bit more reluctant, but Twitch states that this evidence is really checking out, which means they need to take it more seriously. He hands Sam a file that shows a detailed rundown of all of the financial records of the campaign of Senator Jennings, both domestic and abroad. Sam then states, well, so what? It's some government stiff. Where's the surprise there? He then goes on to tell Twitch that, there's parts of this that just don't seem to add up. After Banks killed himself, we gave all of the information needed to railroad tons of individuals, but for some reason it all got swept under the rug and the papers made it look like Banks was just out there all on his own. He then goes on to tell Twitch that the involvement of all of this information around Jennings doesn't seem to make sense, as Jennings has been retired for quite some time, which only alludes to the idea that someone bigger was pulling the strings. They then go on to deduce that whoever the informant is either a crackpot or a very high-profile individual, and that they may in fact be looking to bring down someone really high up in the government. However, while Sam does agree they need to try and follow through a little bit more on this, he's quite reluctant in some aspects. He wants to know exactly how this informant knew where to find them, given they weren't even open yet when the informant contacted them, and how on earth this informant got a hold of their phone number the exact day it was activated. However, before Twitch can respond to either of these questions, Sam lets out a gigantic fart, which Twitch is not too happy about, as we see him grab his nose and run across the room. Sam just chuckles as his partner throws open a window and thrusts his head outside to take a deep breath of fresh air. However, when he brings his head down, he is quite alarmed by what he sees as he tells Sam to get his gun. As Twitch hurriedly starts down the stairwell with his gun drawn, he explains to Sam that there's a car parked out back that wasn't there a few hours ago. Sam begins to follow his partner as he pulls a set of keys out of his pocket and asks, gee, I wonder who that could be. I guess we're going to find out. Twitch then bursts out of the back door to the alleyway and quickly scans all of the shadows for any would-be ne'er-do-wells that may be hiding. Once he confirms that no one else is in the alleyway, he exclaims, what kind of idiot would park a car here? As it turns out, that idiot is in fact Sam himself, as he dangles the keys in front of Twitch's face and shouts, surprise, what do you think, buddy? Twitch, quite confused, asks, think of what? And Sam tells him, the car. Weren't you asking yourself why I wasn't too concerned when your car blew up and why I never got mad when we had to take all those taxi rides? Twitch states, well, I thought you were maturing, sir, but Sam tells him, nope, not at all. I used the last bit of money I had saved up to buy myself this little beauty right here. It's all been rebuilt for high performance, and we can finally call ourselves true private detectives now, as we finally have our own ride to go with our personas. I call it the Crime Mobile. Twitch tells him that it's pretty impressive, I guess, as Sam says, oh, and by the way, buddy, I'm sorry for all those beer and pizza farts back there. It's pretty obvious that Sam is far more excited about this 55 Chevy than Twitch is, but that's pretty well in line with the character development that we've seen between these two thus far. Back on the fourth sphere of hell, the demon continues to extrapolate information from Spawn so that it can further explain why he is here in the first place. The demon explains to Spawn that it is also due to his high level of hatred, most notably his hatred for his former employer on Earth, Jason Wynn. He explains to Spawn that the hatred that he had for Wynn only grew as the two of them continued to butt heads. As Al continued to question Wynn's orders more and more, Wynn finally decided to have Al murdered as a result. This, of course, led Spawn to being where he was when he accepted the deal from Mabalja, and that his hatred and death only grew for Wynn once he realized who he was and exactly what led to his death. He then tells Spawn, though, that he should be proud of this hatred because Mabalja is, as he holds hate-filled killers very high on his list. He then tells Spawn that the most hateful of these talented killers get a special bonus. That, of course, being the symbiote costume that separated itself from Spawn earlier. The demon then goes on to explain to Spawn that he probably is wondering why the symbiote is not protecting him here, but that's because the fourth sphere of hell is exactly where all of these symbiotes are grown and originate from. They are made on the fourth sphere, and when they reach maturity, they are delivered to Mabolja on the eighth sphere so that he can use them for the people in his army. And only the most pure of these symbiotes are dealt out to those who would become generals in the Mabolja's army, which is why he is so proud of this, as he describes it, K-125 unit, who we see kind of take a form similar to that of a cat as it curls up next to him. Now, this is important for a few reasons. Number one, we've never been told exactly where the symbiotes originate from. I went back and double-checked in the Blood Feud miniseries to see if it was explained there, but it's not at all. It just kind of talks about them in a very vague sense as to the fact that they do come from hell, essentially, but never gives any real details as to what parts of hell they come from. So that's a new bit of information. Also, during the Blood Feud miniseries, we learned that Spawn's symbiote costume referred to itself as the K7 Letha, but here we see this archdemon refer to it as a K125 unit. So I don't know if this is just an oversight by Todd McFarlane or perhaps some sort of a retcon. We're not certain in any way. Also, if you'd like to know more about the costume and the way that it is bonded to Al Simmons, aka Spawn, feel free to check out the Blood Feud miniseries episodes I have in my Spawn miniseries playlist. The demon then goes on to reiterate a bit of information that we learned in the previous issue, telling Al that he was not chosen as a Hellspawn because he was evil, but because of anticipation of him realizing his full potential, and that's how all souls reach heaven or hell, and that he's no different in any way, but that he hasn't accepted that yet. As he continues to peel layers away from Spawn's body, he asks why. Is it because of your supposed love of Wanda? We then see Spawn scream out in pain, and the demon apologizes, asking him to please excuse the pain. He then goes on to explain to Spawn that those who came before him asked to have some sort of physicality here on the fourth sphere, since they had no other tangible way of assuring themselves that they existed. So the demon's response to this was to skin them, and that he now keeps some of the skin that he takes from each individual and sews it to his own body as a souvenir. He then tells Spawn that he's looking at his memories of Wanda and asks Spawn if he remembers them as well, that it took him 4 days to ask her out after he first saw her, and that honestly Wanda didn't seem like she was that into him on their first date. However, that changed over time, and eventually the two of them were married, pledging to spend the rest of their lives together. The demon reminds Spawn that he felt everything was perfect, and despite the fact that he could never father a child with Wanda, he believed that love would carry him through, and that his love for both Blood and Wanda continued to expand, and that the two of these things fought for supremacy, but unfortunately for Spawn, love needs constant nourishment, which meant something had to give, and the thing that gave ultimately was him, as we see Wanda over his grave. The demon then tells Spawn that while Wanda mourned for a time, she quickly got over his loss and found comfort in the arms of another, his best friend Terry Fitzgerald, and that after the two of them wed, Terry's plumbing actually worked, as the demon puts it, so he was able to father a child with Wanda, and that once Cyan was born, the two of them nearly forgot all about Al, as why would they need to remember him? They had each other, and they had each other's love. The demon then goes on to mock Spawn, telling him she gave him her body. However, Spawn responds by saying it's not her fault. The demon agrees that it is indeed not, and that Spawn is in this predicament though because of love, and that this is because Mabulja is toying with him and allowing him to believe that he's still human. That he lets Spawn hang on to something from his previous life even though he doesn't need it with his necroplasmic body. We then see the demon reach into Spawn's chest as he states, "I'm going to relieve you of that now," as he pulls out Spawn's heart. He tells Spawn that with this removed, he is finally able to become the Hellspawn that he was always intended to be and take on that mantle. We then see Spawn start to disappear as the demon tells him to give his best regards to his master Mabulja and to also say hello to the other lords of hell as he passes through their domains as well. And then he thanks him once again for the souvenir that he gets to keep as he holds the heart in his hands. On the final page of the story, we see Mabulja's head floating in limbo as he laughs maniacally over the heart of Spawn. He states that everything is going according to his plan and that Spawn has reached his second incarnation, and that with a bit more modification, he'll be finally able to take his place as a general in Hell's armies, one devoid of any emotion whatsoever. We then get to the image info page, and this one's actually a little bit different. It goes into a big rundown of a lot of the behind the scenes and production stuff that was going on with the Spawn movie at this point. It was kind of interesting to learn a little bit of like the ideas of how they were doing fitments of the costumes and doing some film tests with the actors. It wasn't anything like I didn't know already, but it was kind of cool to read about the firsthand account from Terry Fitzgerald himself. So I'm not upset that I read it, but again, it wasn't like super detailed information. I wish it had gone into a little bit more in terms of like real behind the scenes stuff that I had never heard before. We then reach the spawning grounds, the letter section of the comic book, and there were only a couple letters that I found interesting in this one. Notably, the first one was a reader asking when Todd came up with the idea for Spawn and if it was when he worked at Marvel or, you know, somewhere along that time frame. Perhaps he was going to use him in like a Spider-Man book or something originally. But Todd goes on to explain that he actually came up with the idea for Spawn when he was just doodling one time when he was much younger, way before he ever got into the comic book industry. He doesn't say an exact year, but he kind of implies that it was possibly when he was like in high school or maybe early in his college years. But it was definitely long before he was actually working in the comic industry in any official capacity. He then goes on to explain to another reader in another letter how exactly his salary works. The reader was curious of how Todd was able to keep the pricing of Spawn so consistent over the 4 years of its existence at this point, whereas so many other comic books had gone up in price. And Todd explains that it was because he takes a much lower salary than some of the other creators at Image did, or perhaps the way that the people were paid at Marvel, and that he did this on purpose so that when the expenses of producing a comic book went up, he could keep the prices level for the consumer, which is an interesting way to go about it. He's essentially stating that he's taking less money for himself to make sure that the comic book remains affordable to the average buyer, which is admirable, though at a certain point, this becomes unsustainable. You can only lower your salary so many times before you're unable to live yourself. And eventually, we would see Todd raise the price of Spawn as inflation is a real thing and the cost of production is always going to keep going up. We then get to a couple of pinups. This one on the left by Kevin Conrad and T. Broker. I'm not certain exactly what it's supposed to be. It almost looks like Spawn's face is coming through some sort of an enchanted mirror of some kind or something. And this one on the right by Roy Y. I don't know who that is, but I really like this pinup. We see Angela lying on the ground with a demon's head impaled on her sword as she smirks upward at Spawn, implying that perhaps the two of them were battling against this demon and she was able to get the kill instead of him, or that maybe he was too late showing up and that she already had everything dealt with by the time he got here and she's just kind of rubbing it in his face. But I really like how well done this one is, and I like the coyness of Angela that's being portrayed in this image. We then reach the end cap section, which shows off a bunch of new toys that are going to be coming out in 1997, notably Zombie Spawn, which is definitely a figure I remember, as well as Wolf Spawn, who I also remember, though I don't seem to recall this Weed Whacker figure anywhere, or No Body, which is very Arnim Zola themed in my opinion. We also then get a Flebiac skeleton. I don't recall this figure at all. And the first toy appearance of Sam and Twitch, who were sold in a 2-pack. They were really pushing the idea that these two figures were coming together and really kind of like touting that that was super cool. I don't recall if it was the same price as the other figures, but if it was, that was kind of a heck of a bargain for getting two figures in the same package at a price you would normally pay for just one. We then get two advertisements, one for the second series of Spawn trading cards. These ones are in chromium, meaning they're even less detailed than the previous generation of trading cards, and an advertisement for the beginning of Curse of the Spawn. Now, I have all of Curse of the Spawn and will be making videos about Curse of the Spawn as it coincides with the normal ongoing series. The one problem that this is going to create for me that I did not consider when I started this channel is the idea that the side series that accompany the mainline ongoing series will need to be done at the same time as I'm going on with the ongoing series, meaning that for well over a year, there's going to be like 2 Spawn videos every single month on this channel. And in some cases, maybe 3 if there's also a mini series tied into all this. I really didn't consider that when I started things, and it is going to make the channel very Spawn-centric for a little while as a result. So hopefully that doesn't turn anyone off, but I want to make sure that I'm putting out these videos on these books to reflect these books as they were originally being published in terms of how they may or may not play into one another. And in an attempt to try and keep the story straight, I feel like I really need to do it in that manner. So just stick with me. I promise this is not going to be just a Spawn channel, but as a result of the way that these books were originally published, it is going to become very Spawn-centric for a period of time. We then get 2 more advertisements, one for Overstreet's Fan number 16, which will feature Spawn Fan Edition number 1. I do not have Spawn Fan Edition number 1 and would like to have it, so that's, I guess, something else I'm going to have to keep an eye out for. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for the Spawn Bible, which I do have, and if memory serves correctly, I'll have to make a video about the Spawn Bible next month to keep it in line with where it was originally published in the Spawn ongoing series. So stay tuned for that. If it's not next month, it's probably the month after, so it's going to be very shortly in the near future. And that was Spawn number 51. Honestly, I have no complaints about this book. I did find it slightly odd that Todd completely skipped over the 3rd sphere of hell and went straight to the 4th, but it doesn't really detract from the story in any way. And those of you who were a little bit more observant may have noticed that at no point did I ever say the name of the archdemon who ruled over the 4th sphere. And that's because at no point in this issue is that demon ever given a name. We have no idea who exactly that archdemon is, and I don't recall if he ever shows up again. So this may be the one and only time we see him, and if so, we never really got a name to go along with him, which is, you know, a different way of going about it. But in terms of the overall story, it's not something that's really all that important. So keeping it a little bit mysterious, in my opinion, works in this instance. Also, we get an update about where Sam and Twitch are at in terms of what their options are with this mysterious informant that they're dealing with. And we also got to catch up with Terry and Wanda, noticing that, you know, Wanda's a little bit uneasy about Terry having this sudden and miraculous recovery. And we also see Cyan having a very strong connection to the shoelace that once held together Spawn's face. and for seemingly no reason. She wasn't there to witness when Spawn healed her father, but she is very much attached to this filth-covered shoelace that is a connection to the being that did heal her father, which implies that maybe somehow she is aware of Spawn in some way or another and how he helped her family. Of course, this is complete conjecture on my part. I'm not certain exactly if this is what's being implied, but it is definitely something that Todd wanted to make note of. Also, I did not remember this issue at all before I read it for this episode. I don't know how any of this slipped my memory, as so many different things were revealed, notably about the symbiotes being grown in the fourth sphere of hell and learning so much information about Hell's fourth sphere. So it was really kind of cool to go back and read this and get this complete refresher course on all of this Spawn lore that I had just totally forgotten. Now, you may not agree with any of my points that I made in this video. You might think that this story wasn't very good and that the whole idea of the fourth sphere being blanked out was just a convenient excuse for Greg to not have to draw any backgrounds. You may not have cared about any of the progression of the side stories with Sam and Twitch or Wanda and Terry. And you might have thought that this whole thing of Spawn going through the different spheres of hell is completely unnecessary to the character and that the whole book suffers as a result. But if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.